drinker?
I'd rather just put on some music and just do it that way, but I still get fear when I got to get up in front of a group of people. It's my sobriety date is June 9th of 91. I come into these rooms by probably a lot of prayers, and I had a son I was raising by myself. He had come to live with me when he was between 3 and 4, and he was 5 when I come into these rooms. Actually, I have 3 sons. There's a different story with each one of them. That's because I'm a kind of a different type of person. I'm one of you. I'm a drunk, so you know what that's all about. So I'm try to keep it simple, not get drugged down by the drunk log. And I don't remember my first drink. I come from a neighborhood that was called, originally I'm from California. I moved to Kentucky last year. My sisters lived there 27 years. And come from a family of 5, and it's just me and her left, besides our children and grandchildren. I have 9 grandchildren that never seen me drink, from 22 down to 2 years old. I have 3 sons from 39 to 29. And I think all 3 of them possibly could have this disease, but it's none of my business. I just sick God on them. You know, I have to worry about keeping myself sober and staying spiritually fit. That's the reason I come to these meetings. I kind of got here, the way I kind of got here is, got to the point I was looking in the mirror, and the way I was speaking to myself I didn't like. And God gave me a moment of clarity. You know, I had this boy that I was pushing to his bedroom, to the backyard to play on the swing set. And he gave me a moment of clarity on what I was doing with my life and where I was taking my son, you know. And I had one parent I could talk to, and that was my mom. I spoke to her once, and I said I was going to quit, change my life, because I didn't always live like I was living at that time. And so about a month later, I said, you know, I think I'm going to have to get some help. And she says, well, you know, I know this lady that comes to the community center and plays bingo. Her name is Sandy. She goes, most women do not like her because she uses that F word a lot. And that wasn't for family or fun or anything like that, you know. She goes, but none of them have taken the time to talk to her. She goes, I've talked to her, and she helps a lot of people, a lot of young people. She goes, I'll talk to her. And so she ended up getting her phone number, and Sandy was a Skid Row drunk. But she talked just the way I did at the time. You know, my vocabulary was, I'd say 3 words, and 2 of them begin with F. And today, you know, it's a lot different. I still can use that word. I don't claim to be perfect. It's about spiritual progress. And so since I've come in the program, I come in and I would say I was an alcoholic and an addict. So I was separating myself, and I did loving moral inventories of all you guys, and I'd gladly share it with you if you wanted me to or not. I know you guys were pretty screwed up, and most of you I didn't like. And my sponsor, I went through a spin dry 28-day program, which I was so good at it, I did it in 25. And I got to go back, though, for aftercare. The guy that was running the show didn't quite think it was all my fault. He thought that maybe the counselor I got into it with might have had a little to do with it, you know. And so, but I was going to say he pushed my button, but it wasn't that he pushed my button. If he touched me, my button was already pushed. There was no anger. It was just immediate rage. You know, it just... And I think so, more so towards, it had to do with being the youngest in a family of 5. I had 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters. I had one brother that, if he was around, 11 years older, that would protect me from the one that was 6 years older. And I wasn't actually as big as I am now as far as the weight and everything. I used to be taller than I am bigger around, but now it's reversed. So, in fact, the last fight I got into was with my brother that I wouldn't fight him in the house. He'd get me in a corner and there was nothing I could do. I was smaller, He'd hold me down. I was very ticklish. He'd tickle me till I'd cry. And he would take everything. He'd never lie about taking it, but he'd tell you he wasn't giving it back till he was done with it. Or if it was food, he was eating it, And his nickname my uncle gave him was Butch, and he was a Butch. I mean, he just, he taught me real fast. Yet by the time I was 10 or 11, I could outrun him. So I would go outside and I learned about equalizers. I could hit and run like a little fighter pilot. And anyway, the neighborhood I grew up in, alcohol and drugs were easy to come to. I mean, and then if my brother was in town or my oldest sister's first husband, I could get anything I wanted from them. And then there was times that we used to, the liquor store there, we'd stock the box and when you take the garbage out, you take a little extra out, in the garbage. And then you go back and pick it up later. And so from about the 8th grade on, I guess, started drinking. But I remember in the 6th grade, we'd steal a couple beers. At lunchtime, we'd take off and go to this one friend's house. And if there was a beer truck, we'd just take a couple beers off the truck. Or we'd go to his house and say, "Oh, you got beers in here, Bobby?" He goes, "Yeah, but those are my dad's. If you drink any, I'm going to get in trouble." And we'd always convince him one. And he would always tell us about his ass whipping that he would get. And which I never took my dad's beer, because I knew that was a big no-no. And anyway, a group of guys that I grew up with, we were teenagers and we all did the same stuff. We hung out at this one house. Their father was a merchant marine, never home. They didn't have to listen to their mother, and that's where the party was at. And all of our birthdays, belly button birthdays, not AA birthdays, but could have used the program then, probably. There's no doubt about it. We're in the same month. We were all Leos. So there was a group of us, and two of them are, well, one of the guys, he's not, but I didn't care for him too much. But they're doing life in prison. A couple of guys, some of them are dead, and some are spun. And there's a few that escaped. But they kept on living the way they left. They lived. In fact, there was one guy I'd go by and see. He could fix anything, and so he ended up a head maintenance guy at this place. They made plastic pipes in different places. They paid him really good money because he could fix anything, and he was good at what he did. But he drank and did whatever he did. In fact, I think he's still doing it. And I'd go by and see him, and after I was sober a while, because we used to get together, and even after we grew up, we'd get together once a year and go camping or something, and have a party. We'd invite new people that we had met along the way, and because we went different directions, and it was just kind of like when we were kids growing up, We were still kids, but we just the bodies had gotten older, but the mind was stuck, and so I was kind of a mad scientist when I was growing up, and I experimented real heavy on things. Alcohol made me Superman. The cape didn't always work. It made me bulletproof, all kinds of proof, and I went to jail on alcohol a lot more than other things. And it was, and I went on a lot of crazy rides. I liked to drive real fast. I've always liked speed and vehicles, cars and motorcycles. In fact, I have a 2009 Buell. It runs pretty good. And today my rush is getting up here in front of you guys and speaking. And I think the rush is just being honest. That's the reason the fear sets in. You know, oh, I got to get over there and I got to be honest with these people. Fuck, I don't know if I can even do this shit. Do I want to be honest? I found out I can lie today if I choose to. I found out that everything I did when I drank and used, I can do today if I choose to. It doesn't mean it's going to make me feel good. In fact, I always felt as a kid, even a kid growing up, that when I lied about something, that I always had this neon light. I would stick to my story, you know, it's kind of like that song, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. I'd always stick to my story. I didn't care how stupid it sounded, you know. And I remember going to probation, getting arrested for going to the probation department to be analyzed. And the probation officer asked me, he goes, you know, I've read the report. He goes, now I'd like to hear the truth. And I started telling him the same story. He goes, I don't want to hear that shit. I said, well, then you don't want to hear the truth. You know, I was sticking to my story, and it did sound like shit. And anyway, I experimented, and I blacked out coming on to, you know, I didn't live too far away from San Francisco, and I had an older brother who used to go over there and cop, and that was during the 60s, late 60s, and early 70s, and there was a lot of psychedelics and all that stuff. And that's part of my story. I know it breaks the traditions. I know about the traditions, and I've been to NA. I didn't like it because they weren't in the solution. That's what I found out for me. I was going there with a friend. We had the same sponsor at the time, which I kept, and he didn't. Well, I asked this guy to be my temporary sponsor because I remember when I was in that spin dry, they told me, if you ain't got the guts to ask him to be your sponsor, ask him to be your temporary sponsor. And so when I got out of the spin dry, I noticed they were building a house a few doors down from my parents, and I'd worked for this outfit before, and so I went down there and talking to the guy that was working, and I ended up going back to work for these people. And I asked this guy to be my temporary sponsor, and he was for 23 years until he passed away. And you know, he had retired at 65, was out working on a job, and I kind of jumped around, so if you can keep up with me, you're doing good. So, and he built a scaffold, him and his son were up on it, and it broke, and he fell. They both fell, and his son didn't get hurt, and he hit his head. So his son took him to the hospital, and they did an x-ray, and he had a blood clot, so they took and did emergency. They took him to another hospital, did an emergency operation. He had a stroke, and he didn't come back. I went up and seen him when they had him hooked up to life support, and and I had already experienced, you know, before I come in the program, I had a brother that died. In fact, the one that I was his private punching bag. He died, and I got drunk the night before we buried him, blackout drunk on wine. And I was told about puking, and the girl that I was living with, she was telling me about, she cleaned it up, and I was wearing sunglasses at the services the next day, and right after the services, I stopped and had a couple drinks at Wild Bill's, which was a bar, and then I left there and went and got a case of beer, and I went to Mom and Dad's, and that's what I did, you know. And then after I come in the program, and I experienced that was with my parents first. You know, and that was, I was between 2 and 3 years sober. My parents died 8 months apart. Mom died from a heart attack, and my dad died from a broken heart. And one time I didn't even think he had one until I come in and I did, you know, searching and fearless moral inventory. And I found out that he did have one. He just couldn't use the word. I never, ever heard the word from him except one time, and it was towards one of his grandchildren. But when I did an inventory, when I went through the roughest time in my life, I was living by myself. I was laid up from being hit by a drunk driver. You believe that? For over a year. I got in a car wreck. They estimated 130 mile an hour impact head on. Guy's third drunk driving, second one with an accident, and I was 23. And I was having marriage problems before that. And I was telling my wife something needed changed, and it did. I mean, you know, she left me the first time to date the neighbor, and the next 6 times I left her, I didn't know how to accept. And so every time I'd leave, I'd go get drunk. And her brother even come and stayed with me. At one time we split up, and me and him, we would go out and party together and all that stuff. But what I did was drink. I drank beer during the day, and I drank Tanqueray at night, and blackout almost every night. And they had warned me about, because I had a bad concussion, about alcohol and methamphetamines, and they said marijuana. They were still experimenting. They thought in some cases it might help, because I was in the hospital like 24 days, remember, like the last 6. They thought they were going to have to drill to relieve the pressure, and they didn't have to. And something I learned about being in a hospital at that time, when I wasn't remembering people coming up and seeing me, there was 2 people I did remember. They come from different religious backgrounds. One was a holy roller. She lived right next door, and I grew up with her son. He was a year older, and when we first met, he bloodied my nose because I opened my mouth. And then he moved next door, and we got into it again, but we became real close friends. And the other one was a Mormon, and I worked for this guy on a big ranch. They had, about 1 million walnut trees, 3 fields of alfalfa, and a special breed of cattle with grazing land. And I was 12 years old. It was a lot of fun. Got to drive the truck, their old ranch truck, a little Chevy with a granny gear and a Ford tractor. And we would work 12-hour days in the summer. Sometimes we'd take off early. He'd come and get us, and we'd go to the river in the back and go swimming, and stuff like that. It was a lot of fun. But those 2 people, during that time, I wasn't remembering anybody. I remembered. And I never thought about it at that time, but after I come into the program, and I was in the program a while, I realized it had nothing to do with their religion. It had to do with their spiritual belief and their own personal contact with the God of their understanding. And see, and that's what I like about this program. It's, this is my religion. The 12 steps, the 12 traditions. And taking my inventory instead of loving appraisals of you. I'm not going to say I don't do that. It's not quite as bad since I've come out here from California. California, I used to take a lot of loving appraisals, especially on the road. They get in the fast lane and want to do 45 miles an hour, and I just don't understand that. I was always told, if you're on a Sunday drive, act like you're on a Sunday drive. If someone's faster than you, just pull off. And that's what I do. If I'm just out driving, I'm in no hurry, I just get out of their way, And anyway, after I got to the program, I do not take directions very well, especially when I got here. And I was going to what they called East Side Group in Midtown. Both of them were pretty old groups. And at Midtown, they had these newcomer meetings on Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. And what they did at the newcomer meetings was the first 3 steps. The A, B, C's pretty much. I can't, he can, I think I'll let him. In other words, learning how to surrender. And I didn't do that very well. In fact, it took me 8 months to surrender just the alcohol. And that was by going out 2 different times. I do everything they said. I was making good money, got another job, was making better money, and out on a date. And this gal I was with, she was around the program at that time. And she goes, "You want to go dancing afterwards?" And I said, we call it the Alano Club. I think they call it the Al-Anon Club or something out here. But where I come from, they call it the Alano Club, right? And it's a commercial building. It's like going into a bar. They had a bar, and they had a place they cooked stuff, pool tables, dance floor, everything. And she goes, "No." She goes, "I thought we'd go to a bar." I said, "Well, I don't know about that. That was before we ate." After we ate, I thought, that don't sound too bad. And so I told her, "Yeah, I think that sounds okay." She goes, "Well, why don't you take me home and then let me get my car first? That way, if you get to where you can't handle it, you can leave." I said, "Oh, okay." So I took her home to get her car, and we went to this bar. And as soon as I pulled in the parking lot, I knew I was going to drink. There was no ifs, ands, and buts. I knew that I was there for a reason. I'd been lying to myself. I was a couple days shy of 6 months, and I thought that if I got rid of the other problem, that I could be a successful drinker. I always thought my dad was a successful drinker because he always got up, went to work, no matter what. and I worked all my life, ever since I was young. I tried stealing, but I just didn't really care for it. It was easier to get out and work and for the money. And so we went in there, and before we went in, I asked her, I said, "You gonna drink?" She goes, "Why?" She goes, "Why, are you?" I said, "Well, yeah, I'm gonna drink." She goes, "Just say you'll have one. Just say you have one." I don't know about the rest of you. Only time I ever went somewhere to have one was a big one, because I was going somewhere else where I was going to be the rest of the night, and there was going to be plenty, And I said, "No, I'm not going to say that, And so we went to the bar, and I asked her, I said, "What would you like to drink?" She goes, "I don't know. What are you going to have?" I said, "I'm going to have a 7-7. She goes, "Oh, that sounds good. Order me a double." She's only going to have one, but she's going to have two at a time. And I thought a double sounded pretty good myself, so I ordered that. And when I took that drink, that's when I knew I was an alcoholic. It was kind of like a flashpoint, like my long lost love, I hadn't seen in a long time, showed up. And it went down quick. And I was ready for another one. I told her, I said, "I'm going to order another round." I said, "Did you want one?" She goes, "Oh, you said you were only going to have one." I said, "No, that was you talking. It wasn't me." And so she kind of got upset. I ran into this young guy in there that I knew from the program. He come up and he asked me, "Robert, what are you drinking?" And I told him, I said, "I'm drinking a 7-7. He goes, "Oh, good, man." He goes, "I'm in here and I seen you come in." He goes, "I thought to myself," he goes, "I come here to relapse." And I thought, "Oh no, program people, And he knew what my last addiction was. And so that's what we ended up doing. He says, "I know where to get some." And so I went over and told her I was going to leave and what we were going to do. And when I did, she slapped my face. Right? And the bouncer just swooped in. And he told her, "You, out of the bar." She goes, "No, you don't understand." He goes, "Yeah, I understand completely. We don't like your type in here." And so he threw her out of the bar. He didn't say nothing to me. I was the one that was being slapped, right? And so we three of us go out, and I go onto the car, and this young kid, he's talking to her and stuff. And pretty soon I get tired of waiting. I walk back over. And I said, "Come on, let's get going, let's get out of here." She goes, "Well, I want to go with you." I said, "Well, you know what we're going to be doing?" She goes, "That's all right, I got my own money." I said, she goes, "That's the first time I ever been thrown out of a bar." And I started laughing, like, "You trying to tell me that's the first time?" I knew it was bullshit. I could tell by her actions, And when I started laughing, she slapped me again. I said, "I'm having fun. Isn't this great?" And so I followed her to her apartment, and she drops off her car, and we go and pick up some stuff. And when she gets in the car, when we leave her apartment, I don't even know what the hell happened. We're driving down the road, all of a sudden she backhands me. Boom! Right in the nose. I had had enough. I told her, I said, "You need to learn to keep your hands to yourself." I said, "You touch me again, I'm going to kick your ass like you're a man." I said, "Do you understand that?" She goes, "Well, I'll get my brothers." I said, "I know your one brother. He plays in the band at the bar I used to go to." And I said, "I'm not worried about him. And as far as your other brother, he's not here either." I said, "So you'll get a good ass whooping before you tell him anything." Well, she didn't slap me or backhand me no more the rest of the night. But it was so wonderful. I had so much fun that night. They talk about the arrows, that people go out, they show us what not to do. Well, I had to go out and to find out I was an alcoholic. I had a drinking problem long before I ever had any other problem. Anytime anything emotionally hit me, I drank alcohol. And that's because I was a blackout drinker. And I realized that, when I did my inventory. And I also have this problem, I like things in order, but my order. That's another character defect, because when I did this four-step, as I'm writing this stuff down, I got to put it in order. I didn't even realize I had a big resentment against God. So he's at the top of the list. And then my father, I'm putting them all in order, that the order I think they should be in, and then after I did this, and I did a fifth with two people. There was a guy in a program that I knew ever since I was about 11, and we stole some pigeons together and stuff like that when we were kids. And I did with him and my sponsor. And it talks about in the big book, more will be revealed to you and to us as a whole. What was revealed to me, a lot of them character defects I thought my father had, they were bright and shiny in me. I was just like him in so many ways, except I didn't have the problem that, he come from a family of 11. He was number 8 out of 11 children. He had 3 sisters and 7 brothers. And they weren't a huggy family, it just wasn't the way they were. And my mom was the complete opposite. And I've never had a problem with that either, as far as showing love, as far as my boys and my grandchildren and different things. But and then I also seen that at different times that my father told me, he goes, he told me as a boy that, I got in trouble once, got locked up for a while as a teenager. But he told me, I couldn't stop him from calling when that took place. But when I was an adult, I got in trouble a few times. No felonies, thank God. But anyway, I got in trouble a few times, but I never called them. And my father always told me, you get in trouble, you get yourself out. And so I always did. I either bailed myself out. I'd always wait to go to court, and they'd never OR me. And I thought, man, I ain't got no big track record or nothing. And they won't even let me out of my OR. I always had to bail out. And so when I got to the program, it just, that's kind of the way I did the program. I was real stubborn. After I went out that time and one other time 2 months later. And then that's when I surrendered. And there's a part in the big book that talks about, I think it's close to the 7th step, to remember as you walk through the day, as you trudge the road to happy destiny, to remember that it isn't your will anymore, it's thy will be done. And a lot of people, I got a toolbox that is full of all these things. If you check these things out, it says, live easy, but think first. I thought, think? That drives me crazy. Every time I think, I get in that hamster wheel, and I just can't let go. And if I wake up to use the restroom in the middle of the night, I can't go back to sleep. I didn't realize I was drinking 2 pots of coffee a day and sodas all day long at work, and maybe that was the problem, And finally, I backed away from caffeine completely, and now I have a few cups during the day, but nothing like I used to. And then I had an old timer explain to me about that think. And what they explained is there's a reason that the first one is little, the middle one is big, and the third one is little. You think a little bit about the past, mainly about the present moment you're in, and a little bit about the future. Hell, I stood like this, and I was just dumping all over the present. I was in the past, and I was in the future, and had nothing to do with the present moment I was in. I didn't know how to be there. And And once I learned that, which I don't learn real fast, I'm one of those that have to get back and run my head into the wall repeatedly and get sick and tired of being sick and tired. That's how I had to do the whole program. It always moved me on to the next step when I get sick and tired of being sick and tired. And then I'd move on to the next step. I can't say that I didn't have the greatest sponsor in the world. That's the way I think. I put him on a pedestal once, but it wasn't long. God showed me he was human, and he got knocked off. He wasn't up there very long, that he is human, and we practice this program to get better and to have a spiritual awakening of our own. He called me once, my sponsor did. He says, Robert, he goes, I had to call and share this with you. I was going to fire you. He goes, because when I give you directions, he goes, you don't follow them very well. I'm thinking, well, I got a mind. I ain't going to follow your damn directions on everything, And then he said he meditated. And this is kind of what helped me on the meditation part. Meditation for me is learning how to listen. There's times that I'll go to meetings for a period of time, and I don't say nothing. And then there's other times you can't shut my ass up. Most alcoholics got enough room in their mouth for 2 sets of teeth. And if they got a captive audience, shit, they're in. Yeah, I did a lot. We all have our stories. I wasn't, after I got over my resentment, which took me a long time, I only hated one time in my life. I wanted to murder someone. And I thought about different ways I could do it. It was after my marriage ended. And I thought about different ways I could do it and get by with it, but I felt no satisfaction. The way I wanted to do it, and I thank God I don't have this in my soul no more, in my bones. I made amends to this person by writing a real simple letter that was probably proofread before it got to him by his mother. His mother was in the program. I met her. I was in the program over 20 years, and I met his mom. And I realized that was his mother, and I said, I owe your son an amends. She goes, oh yeah, what for? I thought, that's really none of your damn business. Only because I wanted to kill you, that's all. He only pulled a gun on me 2 times. Well, he had a gun 3 times, but he pointed it at me twice. And one time I wasn't close enough to get to it. The other time my son was asleep in a room, so I didn't want an accident to happen, him get shot by mistake. And so, but I wanted to cut the guy's throat. I wanted a big Bowie knife, walk up, grab him by his hair, yank it back, and just slice his throat and watch the life drain from his eyes. That was hatred, pure hatred. And all it did was make me real ugly. It pushed people away from me. I was filled with so much rage and anger and hatred at that time. It really sucked. And probably the greatest gift that I was given is when I made, God knows when the timing is right, It's like when I went to that spin dry. They had, me and Sandy, we went out there and did an interview. She tells the story one way and I tell it another way. She probably tells it more correctly than I do. Because I'm not saying that I remember everything perfect, as far as what went on, even after I wasn't drinking and using. My mind was I was kind of like a BB in a boxcar, drinking that Christian crank, and I've only had part of a cup tonight, and I'm just rattling real good. And anyway, we went out there, and they told me to call them Monday, Wednesday, and Friday between 10 and noon. And so I did it for 3 weeks. What happened, though, that 3rd week came up, I figured I'm just going to do this week, and if they don't have room for me this week, then I'm not going to call no more. Well, I called that Friday, and they said, yeah, oh yes, we want you to come in right now. I said, oh, wait a minute. I said, I'm a single parent, my son's in school, which he was in school, I was a single parent, but I had my parents to help me. And really, I wanted to go get loaded, you know, and I did. I went down and got my other stuff, and then on the way, my father was driving me out there because I didn't have a vehicle. He kind of got shot up in a incident on the wrong side of town, you know. Run into people that ripped you off, so you start ripping and running back, and they just don't like that shit, you know. And he was driving me out there, and I wanted him to stop so I could get a beer. I said, hey, Dad, stop. I want to buy a beer. You know, I just want one beer before I go in. He goes, hell no, I ain't stopping. You go out there with alcohol in your breath, they probably won't take you. He goes, you need to go out there and get help. And I'm thinking, myself is thinking, well, he drinks on a regular basis. You know, he drinks his beer, and unless something happens, him and Mom get in a fight or he gets embarrassed, you know, for some reason because of the alcohol. And I noticed that about him. But he didn't stop. And in fact, I remember one time I was the only one at home, and the driveway we had was a pretty long driveway. I was raised in a 600 square foot home. They raised 4 of us there, and there was always room. It seemed like there was always room in the house. And we used to go on vacation every year. We'd go to Oregon for a family reunion. All my family, except me and one other sister, were all born in Oregon. My mom was raised there, and my dad was raised in Nebraska. And so they did things with us, you know, that I know a lot of other people's parents that didn't do them kind of things, you know. And but I had a lot of freedom. I mean, at a very early age, a lot of freedom. And you know, and I married my high school sweetheart. 2 months before I turned 19, I was married. And I had already moved out. I had my own place. I got it right before I turned 18. I rented a place. I was working full time. I had lied about my age and went to work full time. And I worked there at this place for a couple of years. You know, I wanted to race motorcycles from when I was about 16 on. My father wouldn't sign for me. And so after I moved out, about 3 months or so before, 4 months, something like that, a couple of months before I got married, I was racing motorcycles, you know, and I did fair. 2 years time, I went from novice to expert, and it didn't take very long. It was a lot of fun. I was an adrenaline junkie. I loved it. Loved the rush. I still love the rush, even for an old guy. You know, I'll be 63 next month, and so I still like the rush. If I had the money, I think I would love to race sprint cars. It'd be like being strapped to a rocket, you know. And that's what I used to ride, was flat track. You know, you do on 2 wheels what they do with 4 wheels. Slide in there, you take your front tire and bump them a little bit, bump the rear tire so they lose traction. But it's all changed since when I used to ride. You know, they got better equipment, better tires, they got better everything. And I have a friend that's almost 70. He still rides, and he still gets, for his age group, I think he finished 2nd this year in his age group as far as in the district. You know, and anyway, the steps, back to the steps. I hope you don't feel much like a slinky or anything. That's kind of the way I tell my story. I'm kind of like a slinky. There were several things that I had been through. You know, deaths in my family. I was with 3 family members when they passed away, 3 different ones, and including my oldest brother. In fact, when he got real sick there towards the end, he was in the hospital, and I went up to see him. I didn't think he was going to live very much. I figured he wouldn't come out of the hospital, but he survived. and they had him backed off, almost completely backed off the methadone. You know, he was a heroin addict, so, and he would be, what, 74 this year if he was still alive. And he had the natural gift of gab. He could have helped a lot of young people, and he lived like a gypsy. After he got older, anytime he'd get in just a little bit of trouble, he'd bail out and he'd run. And he started going by an alias, you know. I don't know how many states he was wanted in for just stupid little shit. And then finally they caught him in California, and they threw it all out of court. You know, it was kind of a trip how it worked. But the last time he came to California is after I bought all my siblings out on the home I was raised in. You know, I had them come in and do an estimate and had an attorney write things up, and I made an offer to my other 3 siblings, and I bought the home. And it was me and my son that lived there. And I tell you what, I say I raised my son, but my son probably raised me. And I thank God he wasn't quite as bad as I was at that age, you know, because I ran pretty hard as a teenager. When I do things, I was listening the other day, they were talking about being an alcoholic in here and how the addiction, you know, that they go by, and these cakes would call him at Wally World, and he'd go over and buy a cake, and he couldn't just eat a piece of the cake, he'd have to eat the whole damn cake. Well, it's kind of like me when I buy ice cream. I like to buy one ice cream, because if I buy a gallon or anything, take it home, it's gone in a couple of days. You know, I don't know, it's like anything I do, I overdo, you know. And I noticed too, another thing I noticed, that since I've been in the program, a lot of alcoholics work for themselves. They don't like taking orders, you know. they think they're in charge or something. I don't know what it is. I noticed that. I worked with a friend of mine. I was working out of the Carpenters Union, and he'd get pissed off at the boss when we start the day, and I'd go over to where we were supposed to do the work, and he'd take off. He goes, "Oh, screw him." He comes around and tells him I went to use the restroom. I said, "I ain't telling him shit." I said, "I'll let you do that." He asked me where he at. I'm going to tell him I don't know, you know. And I said, "It doesn't matter if you like what he says or not. He's still the boss. He's still the one in charge, you know." And that's what I learned. And I've been in Kentucky long enough to create some resentments. I hired a guy to work with me. I worked on this fourplex for 3 months in Lexington. I met a guy, and he's turning it into a sober living place for women, and it needed a complete rehab. Part of it was built in 1875, and then they did an addition, and whoever went in and did the last work on it did a shabby job as far as their plumbing work, and they just butchered stuff. And so I went in and we tore things apart, putting in new cabinets, and tore sheetrock off that had gotten wet, and from pipes that should have been put in walls that were out of walls that had been stepped on and broken, and just all kind. I mean, you know, replaced tubs. There was 2 new tubs that went in with showers, and I had to pull one of them out to redo the plumbing. I redid all the hot water lines, and I had this guy I hired for a laborer, and I told him, "Treat my tools as if they're yours." Well, I could see why he didn't have no tools, you know. And I taught him how to roll cords, and I said, "Stack this stuff in here." I said, because I was bringing a lot of extra stuff, and it wouldn't fit all in my toolbox. I have a lot of tools. And I said, "Stack this stuff to where you don't stack stuff underneath it that it's going to break." And he didn't worry about it. He would just kept on doing it the same, you know. And then me and him, we got into it a couple times verbally, and we were walking through. I was going to show him what I wanted him to do, and a few times he shoved me from behind. And you know, he's 20 years younger than I am. I just turned and I looked at him. I said, "I really don't appreciate being shoved," you know. And he says, "Well, you know, I just don't realize my own strength. I said, well, you don't need to test it on me, you know? And so I ended up letting him go. And he didn't come to meetings for a while. I knew his sponsor. I talked to his sponsor a little bit. Because, you know, I didn't want him to stop coming to meetings just because we couldn't work together. And next time I seen him in a meeting, I tried to go up and talk to him. He talked to me a little bit inside, but when we got outside after the meeting was over, boy, he come unglued. I just turned, did an about face and started walking away. And his sponsor said, yep, time to go, because he had rode there with his sponsor. And, but it's, you know, learning to do my inventory in each situation that I'm in. What's my part in that position? It isn't, you know, in other words, do I owe an amends? Do I need to change an action? I think the biggest thing that I found out in this program as far as making amends is learning not to live the way I lived, changing actions. And I had an I used to talk to a lot of old timers when I was new in the program, and I had one tell me that in step 6, that, you know, we want God, we humbly ask him to remove our character defects. He says people think they're going to be removed. He goes, they're not. We find new solutions to them old problems. We find new ways of acting out. He goes, in those old tapes, they're alive. They're right there. And they're Memorex. All you got to do is, if you want to act like you used to, is just dig in the files. They're right there. And you can act out just like you did when you was drinking sober. And, you know, and I found that out too. You know, I had this, my sponsor told me, I got in trouble 2 times in the program the first 2 years. I ended up going to court. They came out and gave me a citation for acting out. And I went to court and ended up on probation both times. And I had this guy named Mr. White, this black guy, and I come walk in his office, right? And he starts talking to me like I've been in prison. And I don't know what, he's just being an asshole as far as I'm concerned, you know. And he starts talking to me in a certain mannerism, and I start talking to him back like that. He says, you can't talk to me like that. I said, well, what makes you think you can talk to me like that? He goes, well, I'm your probation officer. I said, I don't give a shit. You know? And before I left there, we were on speaking terms. You know? And I didn't have to see him very many times. He knew I was raising my son by myself. He knew that I was sober, trying to stay sober. And it was, you know, I'd go in, I'd sit, I'd talk to him, and then he told me just to call him. And so I called him, and he got me taken off probation early. And then I acted out again. Damn feelings. I had to learn, when I have feelings, I had to learn not to act instantly on them. Because I was kind of a McDonald's drive-through prayer thing, you know. I'd order at the speaker and get to the window. If the answer to my prayer wasn't there, I'd act out on my feelings and emotions. And that could create problems for oneself. And it did create problems for me. And so I ended up in trouble again. I got the same probation officer. I come walking in there, and he's just shaking his head. He goes, Robert. He goes, you still sober? I said, yes, sir, I'm still sober. And he goes, well, we'll do it the same as we did last time. Just come and see me a few times, and then we'll get you back on the phone. And you know, but he was easy to talk to. The first day it was the hardest part, going in there. And I was told, you know, my father was born in 1910. And so he was old school. And he was 45 when I was born. And so he always tried to teach me, what kind of respect you want out, you put out, you know. And he goes, and if you want to be a good thief, you go to school, you become an attorney, and you get into politics, and you don't tell anybody your secrets. Sounds like a good drunk to me. So anyway, I've talked more than enough, and time's up. And I'm going to turn it back over to Tom. And I thank you guys for listening and putting up with me. Thank you.